Chapter 40. Valencia paused a moment on the porch of the brick house in Elm Street. She felt as if she ought to knock like a stranger. The rose bush, she idly noted, was loaded with buds. The rubber plant stood beside the prim door. A momentary horror overcame her, a horror of the existence to which she was returning, and then she opened the door and walked in. I wonder if the prodigal son ever really felt at home again, she thought. Mrs. Frederick and Cousin Stickles were in the sitting room. Uncle Benjamin was there, too. He looked blankly at Valancy, realizing at once that something was wrong. This was not the saucy, impudent thing who had laughed at them in this very room last summer. This was a grey-faced woman with the eyes of a creature who had been stricken by a mortal blow. Valancy looked indifferently around the room. She had changed so much, and had changed so little. The same pictures hung on the wall, the little orphan that knelt never-finished prayer by the bed whereupon reposed the grey kitten who had never grown up into a cat, the grey steel engraving of Quatre Bras where the British regiment forever stood at bay, the crayon enlargement of the boyish father she had never known, where they all hung in the same places. The green cascade of the Wandering Jew was still tumbled out of the old granite saucepan in the window-stand. The same elaborate, never-used pitcher stood at the same angle on the sideboard shelf, and the blue and gilt vases had been among her mother's wedding presents still primly adorned the mantel, flanking the china clock of her bureaus and bespread ware that never went, the chairs in the exact same place, her mother and Cousin Stickles likewise unchanged, regarding her with a stony unwelcome. Valancy had to speak first. "I've come home, Mother," she said tiredly. "So I see." Mrs. Valancy's voice was very icy. She had resigned herself to Valancy's desertion. She had almost succeeded in forgetting there was a Valancy. She had rearranged and reorganized her systematic life without any reference to an ungrateful or rebellious child. She had taken her place again in society, which ignored the fact that she had ever had a daughter, and pitied her, if pity her at all, only in discreet whispers and asides. The plain truth was, by this time, Mrs. Frederick did not want Valancy to come back, did not ever want to see or hear of her again. And now, of course, Valancy was here, with tragedy and disgrace and scandal trailing after her visibly. "So I see," said Mrs. Frederick. "May I ask why?" "Because I'm not going to die," said Valancy huskily. "Bless my soul," said Uncle Benjamin. "Who said you were going to die?" "I suppose," said Cousin Stickles shrewdly. Cousin Stickles did not want Valancy back either. "I suppose you found out he has another wife, and we've been sure all along." "No, only I wish he had," said Valancy. She was not suffering peculiarly, but she was very tired. If only the explanations were all over and she was upstairs in her old ugly room, alone, just alone. The rattle of the beads on her mother's sleeves as they swung her arms of the reeded chair almost drove her crazy. Nothing else was worrying her. But all at once it seemed she simply could not endure that thin, insolent rattle. "My home, as I told you, is always open to you," said Mrs. Frederick stonily, "but I can never forgive you." Valancy gave a mirthless laugh. "I'd care for very little for that if I could only forgive myself," she said. "Come, come," said Uncle Benjamin testily. He was rather enjoying himself. He felt he had Valancy under his thumb again. "We've enough of mystery. What's happened? Why have you left that fellow? No doubt there's reason enough, but what the particular reason is it?" Valancy began to speak mechanically. She told her tale bluntly and barely. "A year ago, Dr. Trent told me I had angina pectoris and I would not live long. I wanted to have some life before I died. That's why I went away, why I married Barney. Now I found out it is all a mistake. There's nothing wrong with my heart. I've got to live, and only Barney married me out of pity, so I have to leave him free." "God bless me," said Uncle Benjamin. Cousin Stickles began to cry. "Valancy, if you'd only had confidence in your own mother." "Yes, yes, I know," said Valancy impatiently. "What's use of going into that now? I can't undo this last year. God knows I wish I could. I tricked Barney into marrying me, and really he's Bernard Redfern, Dr. Redfern's son of Montreal, and his father wants him to go back to him." Uncle Benjamin made a queer sound. Cousin Stickles took out her black-bordered handkerchief away from her eyes and stared at Valancy. A queer gleam suddenly shot into Mrs. Frederick's stone-gray orbs. "Dr. Redfern? Not the purple pill man?" she said. Valancy nodded. "He's John Foster, too, the writer of those nature books?" But, Mrs. Frederick was visibly agitated, not over the thought that she was a mother-in-law of John Foster. "Dr. Redfern is a millionaire!" Uncle Benjamin shut his mouth with a snap. 10 times over, he said. Valencia nodded. Yes, Barney left some years ago because of some trouble, some disappointment. Now he will likely go back. So, you see, I had to come home. He doesn't love me. I can't hold him to a bond he was tricked into. Uncle Benjamin looked incredibly sly. Did he say so? Does he want to get rid of you? No, I haven't seen him since I found out. But I tell you, he only married me out of pity, because I asked him to, because he thought it would be only for a little while. Mrs. Frederick and Cousin Stickles both tried to speak, but Uncle Benjamin waved a hand at them and frowned portentously. Let me handle this, the wave and frown seemed to say. To Valencia he said, Well, dear, we'll talk it over later. You see, we don't quite understand everything yet. As Cousin Stickles say, you should have confided in us before. Later on, I dare say we'd find a way out of this. You think Valencia can easily get a divorce, don't you? Said Valencia eagerly. Uncle Benjamin silenced with another wave the exclamation of horror he knew was trembling on Mrs. Frederick's lips. Trust to me, Valencia. Everything will arrange itself. Tell me this, Dossie. Have you been happy back up? Was Mr. Redfern good to you? I've been very happy, and Barney was very good to me, said Valencia as if reciting a lesson. She remembered that when she studied in grammar at school, she always disliked past and perfect tenses. They always seemed so pathetic. I have been. It was all over and done with. Then don't worry, little girl. How amazingly paternal Uncle Benjamin was. Your family will stand behind you. We'll see what can be done. Thank you, said Valencia dully. Really, it was quite decent of Uncle Benjamin. Can I go lie down a while? I'm tired. Of course you're tired. Uncle Benjamin patted her hand gently, very gently. All worn out and nervous. Go and lie down, by all means. You'll see things quite differently in a different light when you've had a good sleep. He held the door open, and then she went through, he whispered, What's the best way to keep a man's love? Valencia smiled wanly, but she had come back to the old life, the old shackles. What? She asked as meekly of yore. Not to return it, said Uncle Benjamin with a chuckle. He shut the door and rubbed his hands, nodded, and smiled mysteriously around the room. Poor little Doss, he said pathetically. You don't suppose that that can actually be Dr. Redfern's son, gasped Mrs. Frederick. I see no reason for doubting it. She says Dr. Redfern has been there. Well, the man is as rich as a wedding cake, Amelia. I've always believed there was more in Doss than most people thought. You kept her down too much, repressed her. She never had a chance to show what she was in her, and now she's landed a millionaire for a husband. But, hesitated Mrs. Frederick, they told such terrible tales about him. All gossip and invention. It's always been a mystery to me why people should be so ready to invent and circulate slanders about other people they know nothing about. I can't understand why you pay so much attention to gossip and surmise. Just because you didn't choose to mix up with everybody, people resented it. I was surprised to find out what a decent fellow he seemed to be the time he came to the store with Valencia. I counted all the yards then and there. But he was dead drunk in Port Lawrence once, said Cousin Stickles, doubtfully, yet this was one very willing to be convinced as to the contrary. Who saw him? Demanded Uncle Benjamin, drunkenly. Who saw him? Old gentleman Strang said he saw him, but I wouldn't take old Jemmy Strang's word on oath. He's too drunk himself half the time to see straight. He said he saw him lying drunk on the bench of the park. Push! Redfern's been asleep there. Don't worry about that. But his clothes, and that awful old car, said Mrs. Frederick uncertainly. Eccentricities of genius, declared Uncle Benjamin. You heard Dodge say he's John Foster. Not in literature myself, but I heard a lecturer from Toronto say John Foster's book put Canada on the literary map of the world. I suppose we must forgive her, yielded Mrs. Frederick. Forgive her? Uncle Benjamin snorted. Really, Amelia was an incredibly stupid woman. No wonder poor Doss had gone sick and tired of living with her. Well, yes, I think you better forgive her. The question is, will Snythe forgive us? What if she persists in leaving him? We have no idea how stubborn she could be, said Mrs. Frederick. Leave it to me, Amelia. Leave it all to me. You women have muddled it enough. This whole affair has been bungled from start to finish. If you put yourself a little trouble years ago, Amelia, she would have been bolted over the traces as she did. Just let her alone. Don't worry with her advice or questions till she's ready to talk. She's evidently run away in a panic because she's afraid he'll be angry with her for fooling him. Most extraordinary thing of a Trent to tell her such a yarn, but that's what comes of going to strange doctors. Well, we mustn't blame her too harshly, poor child. Redfern will come after her, and if he doesn't, I'll hunt him up and talk to him man to man. He may be a millionaire, but Valencia's a sterling. You can't repudiate her just because she was mistaken about her heart disease. Not likely he'll want to. Doss is a little overstrung. Bless me, I'll get in the habit of calling her Valancy. She isn't a baby any longer. Now remember, Amelia, be very kind and sympathetic. It was something of a large order to expect Mrs. Frederick to be kind and sympathetic, but she did her best. When supper was ready, she went and asked Valancy if she would like a cup of tea. Valancy, lying in her bed, declined. She just wanted to be left alone for a while. Mrs. Frederick left her alone. She did not even remind Valancy that her plight was the outcome of her own lack of daughterly respect and obedience. One could not, exactly, say such things like that to a daughter-in-law of a millionaire. Chapter 41. Valencia looked dully about her old room. It, too, was so exactly the same that it seemed almost impossible to believe that the changes had come to her since she last slept in it. It seemed, somehow, indecent that it should be so much the same. There was Queen Louise everlasting coming down the stairway, and nobody let the forlorn puppy in out of the rain. Here was the purple paper blind and the greenish mirror. Outside, the old carriage shop with its blatant advertisements. Beyond it, the station with the same derelict and flirtatious flappers. Here the old life waited for her, like some grim ogre that bided his time and licked its chops. A monstrous horror of it suddenly possessed her. When nightfall, and she had undressed and got into bed, the merciful numbness passed away, and she lay in anguish and thought of her island under the stars. The campfire, with her little household jokes and phrases and catchwords, their furry beautiful cats, the lights agleam in the fairy islands, canoes skimming over Mistowas in the magic of the morning, white birches shining among the dark spruces like beautiful women's body, winter snows and rose-red sunset fires, lakes drunken with moonshine, all the delights of her lost paradise. She would not let herself think of Barney, only of these lesser things. She could not endure to think of Barney. Then one thought of him inescapably. She ached for him. She wanted his arms around her, his face against hers, his whispers in her ears. She recalled all the friendly looks and quibs and jests, his little compliments, his caresses. She counted them all over as a woman might count her jewels. Not one did she miss from the first day they met. Those memories were all she'd have now. She shut her eyes and pray. Just let me remember every one, God. Let me never forget one of them. Yet it would be better to forget. This agony of longing and loneliness would not be so terrible if one could forget. And Ethel Travers, that shimmering witch with her white skin and black eyes and shining hair, the woman Barney had loved, the woman whom he still loved. Hadn't he told her he never changed his mind? Who was waiting for him in Montreal? Who was right for a wife for a rich and famous man? Barney would marry her, of course, when he got his divorce. How Valancy hated her and envied her. Barney had said, "I love you" to her. Valancy had wondered what tone Barney would say "I love you" in, how his dark blue eyes would look when he said it. Ethel Travers knew. Valancy hated her for the knowledge, hated and envied her. She could never have those hours in Blue Castle. Those are mine, thought Valancy savagely. Ethel would never make strawberry jam, or dance to old Abel's fiddle, or fry bacon for Barney over a campfire. She would never come back to the little Mistowa shack at all. What was Barney doing, thinking, feeling now? Had he come home and found her letter? Was he still angry with her? Or a little pitiful? Was he lying in their bed looking out on the stormy Mistowas and listening to the rain streaming down the roof? Or was he still wandering in the wilderness, raging at the predicament in which he found himself, hating her? Pain took and wrung her like some great pitiless giant. She got up and walked to the floor. Would morning ever come to this endless, hideous night? And yet, what could morning bring her? The old life without the old stagnations was at least bearable. An old life with new memories, the new longings, the new anguish. Oh, why can't I die? Moaned Valancy. Chapter 42. It was not until early afternoon the next day, when that dreadful old car clanked up Elm Street and stopped in front of the brick house, A hatless man sprung from it and rushed up the steps. The bell was rung as had never been rung before, vehemently, intensely. The ringer was demanding entrance, not asking it. Uncle Benjamin chuckled as he hurried to the door. Uncle Benjamin had just dropped in to inquire how dear Valancy was. Dear Valancy, he had been informed, was the same. She had come down for breakfast, which she didn't eat, gone back to her room, come down for dinner, which she didn't eat, gone back to her room. That was all. She had not talked. She had been let kindly, considerately alone. Very good. Redfern will be here today, said Uncle Benjamin, and now Uncle Benjamin's reputation as a prophet was made. Redfern was here, unmistakably so. Is my wife here? He demanded of Uncle Benjamin without preface. Uncle Benjamin smiled expressively. Mr. Redfern, I believe. Very glad to meet you, sir. Yes, that naughty little girl of yours is here. We have been... I must see her. Barney cut Uncle Benjamin ruthlessly short. Certainly, Mr. Redfern. Just step in here. Valencia will be down in a minute. He ushered Barney into the parlor and betook himself to the sitting room and Mrs. Frederick. Go up and tell Valencia to come down. Her husband is here. But so dubious was Uncle Benjamin as to whether Valencia would really come down in a minute, or at all, that he followed Mrs. Frederick on tiptoe up the stairs and listened at the hall. Valencia, dear, said Mrs. Frederick tenderly, your husband is the parlor, asking for you. Oh, mother! Valencia got out from the window and wrung her hands. I cannot see him. I cannot. Tell him to go away. Ask him to go away. I can't see him. Tell her, hissed Uncle Benjamin through the keyhole, that Redfern says he won't go away until he has seen her. Redfern had not said anything of the kind, but Uncle Benjamin thought he was that sort of fellow. Valencia knew he was. She understood that she might as well go down now, first as last. She did not look at Uncle Benjamin as she passed him on the landing. Uncle Benjamin did not mind. Rubbing his hands together and chuckling, he retreated to the kitchen, where he genially demanded of Cousin Stickles, "Why are good husbands like bread?" Cousin Stickles asked why. "Because women need them," beamed Uncle Benjamin. Valencia was looking anything but beautiful when she entered the parlor. Her white night had played fearfully havoc with her face. She wore an ugly brown and blue gingham, having left all her pretty dresses in the blue castle. But Barney dashed around the room and caught her in his arms. "Valencia, oh darling, you little darling idiot! Whatever possessed you to run away like that? When I came home last night and found your letter, I went quite mad. It was 12 o'clock. I knew it was too late to come here then. And then I walked the floor all night. And then this morning Dad came. I couldn't get away until now. Valencia, whatever got into you? Divorce, forsooth! Don't you know?" "I know you only married me out of pity," said Valencia, blushing him away feebly. "I know you don't love me. I know—" "You've been lying awake at 3 o'clock too long," said Barney, shaking her. "That's the matter with you. Love you? Oh, don't I love you? My girl, when I saw that train coming down on you, I knew whether I loved you or not." "Oh, I was afraid you'd try to make you think you cared," cried Valencia passionately. Don't! I know all about Ethel Travers. Your father told me everything. Oh, Barney, don't torture me. I can never go back to you." Barney released her and looked at her for a moment. Something in her placid, resolute face spoke more convincingly than words of her determination. "Valencia," he said quietly, "father shouldn't have told you everything because he didn't know it. Will you let me tell you everything?" "Yes," said Valencia wearily. Oh, how dear he was! How she longed to throw himself into her arms! And he put her gently down in the chair. He could have kissed the slender brown hands that touched her arms. She could not have looked up as he stood before her. She dared not meet his eyes. For his sake she must be brave. She knew him. Kind, unselfish. Of course he would pretend not to want his freedom. She might have known he would pretend that, once the shock of realization was over. He was so sorry for her. He understood her terrible position. When had he never failed to understand? But she'd never accept his sacrifice. Never. "You've seen Dad, and you know I'm Barnard Redfern, and I suppose you've guessed I'm John Foster, since you went into Bluebeard's chamber." "Yes, but I didn't go out of curiosity. I forgot you told me not to go in. I forgot." "Never mind. I'm not going to kill you and hang you up in the wall, so there's no need to call for Sister Anne. I'm going to tell you my story from the beginning. I came back last night intending to do it, and yes, I'm old Doc Redfern, son of purple pills and bitter flame. Oh, don't I know it. Wasn't rubbed into me for years." Barney laughed bitterly and strode up and down the room a few times. Uncle Benjamin, tiptoeing through the halls, heard the laugh and frowned. Surely Das wasn't going to be a stubborn little fool. Barney threw himself into a chair before Valencia. "Yes, and as long as I can remember I've been a millionaire's son. But when I was born, Dad wasn't a millionaire. He wasn't even a doctor. Isn't yet. He was a veterinarian and a failure at it. He and Mother lived in a little village in Quebec and were abominably poor. I don't remember Mother. I haven't even a picture of her. She died when I was 2 years old. She was 15 years younger than Father, a little school teacher, and when she died, Dad moved to Montreal and formed a company to sell his hair tonic. He dreamed the prescription one night, it seems. Well, it caught on. Money began to flow in. Dad invented, or dreamed, other things too. Pills, bitters, liniment, and so on. He was a millionaire by the time I was 10. With a house so big, a small chap like myself always felt lost in it. Had every toy a boy could wish for, and I was the loneliest little devil in the world. I remember only one happy day in my childhood, Valancy. Only one. Even you were better off than that. Dad had gone out to see an old friend in the country and took me along. I was turned loose in the barnyard, and I spent the whole glorious day hammering nails into a block of wood. I had a glorious day. When I had to go back to my room of playthings in the big house in Montreal, I cried. But I didn't tell Dad why. I never told him things. It's always been hard for me to tell things, Valancy. Anything that went deep. Most things went deep with me. I was a sensitive child, and even more sensitive as a boy. No one ever knew what I suffered. Dad never dreamed of it. When he sent me to private school, I was only 11. The boys ducked me in a swimming tank until I stood at the table and read aloud all the advertisements of Father's patent abominations. I did it. Then. Barney clenched his fist. I was frightened and half drowned, and all the world was against me. And when I went to college and the Sophs tried the same stunt, I didn't do it. Barney smiled grimly. They couldn't make me do it. But they could and did make my life miserable. I never heard the last of the bills and the bitters and the hair tonics. After using was my nickname, you see. They always such thick thatch. 4 college years were a nightmare, you know. And you don't know what merciless beast boys can be when they get a victim like me. I had few friends. There was always some barrier between me and the kind of people I cared for. The other kind, who had been very willing to be intimate with old Doc Redfern's son, I didn't care for. But I had one friend, or thought I had. Clever bookish chap, a bit of a writer. There was a bond between us. I had some secret aspirations along that line. He was older than I was. I looked up to him and worshipped him. For a year I was happier than I ever been, and then a burlesque sketch came out of the college magazines, a morbid, ridiculous, ridiculing Dad's remedies. The names were changed, of course, but everybody knew who and what it was. Oh, it was clever, damnably so, and witty. McGill rocked with laughter over it. I found out he had written it. Oh, were you sure? Valency's dull eyes flamed with indignation. Yes, he admitted it when I asked. Said a good idea was worth more than a friend any time. And he added, a gracious thrust. You know, Redfern, there are some things money won't buy. For instance, it won't buy you a grandfather. Well, it was a nasty slam. I was young enough to feel cut up, and was destroyed a lot of my illusions and ideals, which was the worst thing about it. I was a young misanthrope after that. Didn't want to be friends with anyone. And then, a year after I left college, I met Ethel Travers. Valancy shivered. Barney, his hands stuck in his pockets, was regarding the floor moodily and didn't notice. Dad told her about you, I suppose. She was very beautiful, and I loved her. Oh, yes, I loved her. I won't deny or belittle it now. It was a lonely, romantic boy's first passionate love, and it was very real. I thought she loved me. I was a fool enough to think it. I was wildly happy when she promised to marry me. For a few months. Then I found out she didn't. I was involuntarily eavesdropping on a certain occasion for a moment. That moment was enough. The proverbial fate of the eavesdropper overtook me. A girlfriend of hers was asking how she could stomach Doc Redford's son in the patent medicine background. His money will gild the pills and sweeten the bitters, Ethel said with a laugh. Mother told me to catch him if I could. We're on the rocks. But, pah! I smell turpentine whenever he comes near me. Oh, Barney! Cried Valancy, ringing with pity for him. She had forgotten about herself, and was filled with compassion for Barney and rage against Ethel Travers. How dare she? Well, Barney got up and began prancing around the room. That finished me. Completely. I left civilization of those cursed dopes behind me and went to the Yukon. For 5 years I knocked about the world, in all sorts of outlandish places. I earned enough to live on, but I wouldn't touch a cent of Dad's money. Then I woke up to the fact I no longer cared a hang about Ethel, one way or another. She was somebody I had known back in another world, and that was all. I had no hankering to go back to my old life. None of it for me. I was free and meant to keep it so. I came to Mistawas, saw Tom Montgomery's Island. My first book had been published the year before and made a hit, and I had been in money from my royalties, so I bought my island. But I kept away from people. I had no faith in anybody. I didn't trust there was such a thing as real friendship or true love in the world. Not for me, anyhow, the son of purple pills. I used to revel in all the old wild yarns they told of me, and in fact, I rather suggested a few of them myself, mysterious remarks which people interpreted in the light of their own prepossessions. Then you came. I had to believe you loved me, really loved me, not my father's millions. There was no reason why you should want to marry a penniless devil with my supposed records. And I was sorry for you. Oh, yes, I won't deny I married you because I was sorry for you. And then I found out you were the best and jolliest and dearest little pal and chum a fellow ever had. Witty and loyal and sweet, and you made me believe in the reality of friendship and love, and the world seemed good again just because you were in it, honey. And I've been willing to go on forever just as they were. I knew that, the night I came home and saw my home light shining out from the island for the first time, and I knew you were waiting for me. And after being homeless all my life, it was beautiful to have a home, to come home hungry at night and know there was good supper and a cheery fire, and you. But I didn't realize what you actually meant to me until that moment at the switch, when it came like a lightning flash. I knew I couldn't live without you, and if I didn't pull you loose in time, I'd die with you. I admit it bowled me over, knocked me silly. I couldn't get my bearings for a while. That's why I acted like a mule. But the thought that drove me to the tall timber was the awful one that you were going to die. I always hated the thought of it, but I suppose there wasn't any chance for you, so I put it out of my mind. Now I had to face it. You were under death sentence, and I couldn't live without you. When I came home last night, I had made up my mind that I'd take you to all the specialists in the world, that something surely could be done for you. I felt sure you wouldn't be as bad as Dr. Trent thought, when those moments on the tracks hadn't even hurt you. And then I found your note, and went mad with happiness, and a little terror for fear you didn't care much for me after all, and had gone away to get rid of me. But now, it's all right, isn't it, darling? Was she, Valencia, being called darling? I can't believe you care for me, she said helplessly. I know you can't. What's the use, Barney? Of course you're sorry for me. Of course you want the best you can straighten out this mess. But you can't be straightened out that way. You couldn't love me. Me? She stood up and pointed tragically to the mirror over the mantel. Certainly not even Allard Tierney would have seen beauty in the woeful, haggard little face reflected there. Barney didn't look at the mirror. He looked at Valencia as if he liked to snatch her, or beat her. Love you, girl! You're like the core of my very heart. I hold you like a jewel. Didn't I promise I'd never tell you a lie? Love you. I love you with all that there is in me to love. Heart, soul, and brain, every fiber of my body and spirit is thrilling to the sweetness of you. There's nobody in the world for me but you, Valancy. You're a good actor, Barney, said Valancy with a wan little smile. Barney looked at her. So you don't believe me yet? I can't. Oh, damn, said Barney violently. Valancy looked up, startled. She had never seen this Barney. Scowling, eyes black with anger, sneering lips, dead white face. You don't want to believe it, said Barney in the silk-smooth voice of ultimate rage. You're tired of me. You want me to get out of it, free of me. You're ashamed of the pills and the liniment, just as she was. Your sterling pride can't stomach it. It was all right as long as you thought you hadn't long to live. A good lark. You could put up with me. But a lifetime with old Dark, Redfern's son, is a different thing. Oh, I understand. Perfectly. I've been very dense. But I understand at last. Valancy stood up and stared at his furious face, and then she suddenly laughed. You darling, she said. You do mean it. You really do love me. You wouldn't be so enraged if you didn't. Barney stared at her for a moment. Then he caught her on his arms with the low laugh of a triumphant lover. Uncle Benjamin, who had been frozen with horror at the keyhole, suddenly thawed out and tiptoed back to Mrs. Frederick and Cousin Stickles. Everything's all right, he announced jubilantly. Dear little Doss. She would send for his lawyer right away and alter his will again. Doss should be his sole heiress. To her that should certainly be given. Mrs. Frederick, returning to a comfortable belief in the overruling Providence, got out the family Bible and made an entrance under marriages. But, Barney, protested Valencia after a few minutes, your father, somehow, gave me to understand you still loved her. He would. Dad holds the championship for making blunders. There's one thing that's better left unsaid. You can trust him to say it. But he's in a bad old soul, Valancy. You'll like him. I do, now. And his money isn't tainted money. It's made honestly. His medicines are quite harmless. Even his purple pills do people a whole heap of good if they believe in them. But I'm not fit for your life, sighed Valancy. I'm not clever or well educated or my life is in Mistowas and all the wild places of the world. I'm not going to ask you to live in the life of a society woman. Of course, you must spend a bit of time with Dad. He's old and lonely. But not in that big house of his, pleaded Valancy. I can't live in a palace. I can't come down to that after your blue castle, grinned Barney. Don't worry, sweet. I couldn't live in that house myself. It is a white marble stairway with gilt banisters, and looks like a furniture shop with the labels off. Likewise, it's the pride of Dad's heart. We'll get a little house somewhere outside of Montreal, in the real country, near enough to see Dad often. I think we'll build one for ourselves. A house you built for yourself is so much nicer than a hand-me-down. But we'll spend our summers in Mistowas, and our autumns traveling. I want you to see Albrema. It's the nearest thing to a blue castle of your dreams I can think of. And there's an old world garden in Italy that I want to show you, the moon's rising over Rome through the dark cypress trees. Will it be lovelier than the moon rising over Mistowas? Not lovelier, but a different kind of loveliness. There's so many kinds of loveliness, Valancy. Before this year you've spent all your life in ugliness. You know nothing of the beauty of the world. We'll climb mountains. We'll hunt for treasures in the bazaars of the Samarkand. Search out the magic of the East and West. Run hand in hand in the rim of the world. I want to show it all. See it again through your eyes. Girl, there are a million things I want to show you, do with you, say to you. It will take a lifetime. But we must see about that picture by Tyranny after all. Will you promise me one thing, Aunt Valancy solemnly? Anything, said Barney recklessly. Only one thing. You are never, under any circumstances or any provocation, cast it upon me that I ask you to marry me. Chapter 44. Extract from letter written by Miss Olive Sterling to Mr. Cecil Bruce. It's really disgusting that Doss's crazy adventure should have turned out like this. It makes one feel as there's no use in behaving properly. I'm sure her mind is unbalanced since she left that home. What she said about dust piles showed that. Of course, I don't think there's anything ever a matter with her heart. Or perhaps Snithe and Redfern, or whatever his name really is, fed purple pills to her back in Mistowa's hut and cured her. It would make quite a testimonial for the family ads, wouldn't it? He's such an insignificant-looking creature. I mentioned this to Doss, and all she said was, I don't like collar-ad men. Well, he's certainly no collar-ad man. Though, I must say, there's something rather distinguished about him, now that he has cut his hair and put on some decent clothes. I really think, Cecil, you should exercise more. It doesn't do to get too fleshy. He also claims, I believe, to be John Foster. We can believe that or not, as we like, I suppose. Old Dog Redfern has given them 2 millions for a wedding present. Evidently the purple pills bring in a bacon. They're going to spend the fall in Italy and the winter in Egypt and motor through Normandy in apple blossom time. Not that dreadful old Lizzie, though. Redfern's got a nice, wonderful new car. Well, I think I'll run away, too, and disgrace myself. It seems to pay. Uncle Ben is a scream, likewise Uncle James. The fuss they make over Doss is now absolutely sickening. To hear Aunt Amelia talking of my son-in-law, Bernard Redford, and my daughter, Mrs. Bernard Redfern, and father and mother are just as bad as the rest, and they can't seem to see that Valencia is just laughing at them all in her sleeve. Chapter 45. Valencia and Barney turned under the mainland pines at the cool dusk of September night for a farewell look at the Blue Castle. Mistowas was drowned in sunset lilac light, incredibly delicate and elusive. Nick and Tup were clawing lazily in the old pines. Good Luck and Banjo were mewed and mewing in separate baskets in Barney's new dark green car en route to Cousin Georgiana. Cousin Georgiana was going to take care of them until Barney and Valancy came back. Aunt Wellington and Cousin Sarah and Cousin Aunt Amelia were also entreated to the privilege of looking after them, but Cousin Georgiana was given. Valancy was in tears. Don't cry, Moonlight. We'll be back next summer, and now we're off for a real honeymoon. Valancy smiled through her tears. She was so happy that her happiness terrified her, but despite the delights of her before her, the glory that was Greece and the grandeur that was Rome, the lure of the ageless Nile, the glamour of the Riviera, the mosque and the palace and the minaret, she knew perfectly well that no spot or palace or home in the world could ever possess the sorcery of her blue castle.